So good afternoon, everyone. It is afternoon by a few seconds anyway. I want to call your attention to upcoming Master Gardener events. And I just did go around handing out event schedules. And now my first thing to say is that I need to make a correction to the event schedule. We've had to rearrange the talks on August 10th and August 24th, switched them with each other. So on the 10th, we will have Bob Kane talking about planting greens for harvest in the fall and winter. And on the 24th, we'll have Gary McLaughlin talking about dahlias, okay? So, but now I have a question. What do you get if you take a person who has a lifetime experience growing plants and is a master gardener and has been for some time, and then you stir in a degree in fine arts and shake well? What do you get? Well, you get Candice, exactly. Candice Gohn, master gardener from Jefferson County, who is has the happy life of being able to farm flowers productively and also design with flowers that she has grown to make beautiful things. So I'm going to turn it over to Candice. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's see, this is not, there we go, it is advancing. All right. Thanks, Muriel. Muriel helped me run a class in Jefferson County for Master Gardeners. Some of the students were in the audience. It was a year that Clallam didn't have a class. And so you guys came over to Jefferson County, and I was fortunate enough to be leading that class. And Muriel gave many of our lectures and saved my bacon more than once. So I'm indebted to Muriel from all those years ago. My talk today is intended to help you be better flower growers. I'll give you some tips and tricks of some things I've learned over the past years, but specifically we'll be talking about maximizing the bloom season, how to increase your flower yields, and how to harvest for vase longevity. A little bit of background about me. I am a native Washingtonian. I grew up on the east side of Seattle. My folks were avid gardeners. They landscaped to within an inch of its life, about an acre of land in Medina. There was never a blossom that wasn't supposed to be there or a tree that was unpruned. My mom mainly assigned me to weeding my driveway, which was not very much fun, but somehow it did instill in me a love of gardening, and following in my mother's footsteps kind of makes me very proud. I have been a master gardener since 2011 and taught the classes there, have done, I'm now working with the State Foundation on the AEC Advanced Education Conference, and am proud of the work that we're doing. And if you haven't signed up for that conference, it's open to not only master gardeners, but non-master gardeners, and we've got a great lineup of speakers. As Muriel said, I have a Master of Fine Arts degree from the University of Washington. And in my professional life, I worked in the housewares industry as a product designer and marketing specialist. I did sales, I did customer service, but where what I really loved to do was the product design, and both working in metal and wood in those. And while the Master Gardener training certainly helped me with being a flower farmer and designer, you might not think that being a textile designer and working with wood and metal really would contribute to my career as a flower farmer. It totally has. It makes me very visual aware. I'm used to working with color, texture, form, shape, and all of those things help me be a better florist. And the small business part of things helps me be a better business manager, which of course is a big part of having a farm for commercial use. I have learned and worked with Peter Gariss, who is the owner of Gariss Gardens, and it is a 2.5 acre farm right in the middle of Port Townsend. It's kind of hidden in plain sight. Many people don't know that it's there, but it's an unusual property in that it's so large, and it's a farm right in Port Townsend. The land was part of Peter, not part, well, the remaining part is part of land that Peter's family purchased in the 70s, and it was the previous home of Coster's egg farm, who in the 30s provided eggs for the entire peninsula, from Forks down to Brennan. When Peter's family got the egg farm, they took over the egg business and ran it for many years. We oftentimes think our soil is so wonderful because of having 5,000 chickens on the property. Peter and I do all the planning of what we're going to be growing. We seed, we transplant, we husband. Peter does the heavy lifting. I kind of do the more fine tuning things, but whatever the farm needs is what we both do. This is a view of the farm. If you can see in the back, well, you can't really tell in the background. If you know Port Townsend, the courthouse, and we're looking towards the courthouse and the high school here. So towards the Sound and Mount Baker. It has a wonderful sunny exposure. We do have some wind that happens there fairly regularly, so we have to guard for that. The farm was the home of the Abundant Life Seed Foundation main garden for many years. They put in a lot of the trees and help with kind of the horticultural history of this piece of land, which is important in the Port Townsend history. It also has been the home of Seed Dreams seed production, and currently Moon Snail Flower Farm rents a couple of plots from us and grows there as well. We grow over 350 varieties on the farm, including many of the things that you're going to be seeing today. Just a side note about the photography, most of the images are taken on the farm. So if you see something that's growing there, know that it can grow in our region because these are home done shots. So we sell to local florists. We sell to other flower farmers who are doing events that might not be growing a specific color or species that they want. They might be doing an event that is beyond the scope of what they grow. We sell to, on our farm stand, we have quite a robust farm stand. We try to keep it stocked at all times, but it's kind of a heavy order. Some days nothing sells, and some days 12 bouquets can walk out the door before noon. We do a lot of DIY buckets for special events, celebration of life, weddings, family reunions, those kinds of things. Individuals can come to us and buy buckets of flowers, can decide what kind of color palette they want, and then do the arranging themselves. And then, of course, we do arranging also. So this is where floral skills come in, and we'll be talking a little bit more about that later on. We also do weddings. We don't do the big churchy installations or arches or things like that, but bridal bouquets and boutonnieres are part of what we do as well. And we do a plant sale annually. Last year, our Master Gardener group did not have a plant sale, and we were the largest one in Jefferson County. So in your sale was just the weekend after, and it surpassed ours, but Gariss Gardens had about 5,000 plants, and we had 2 other growers that were with us. So it's a very large, specifically flower farm sale. And we also have a very robust CSA program where you can buy a subscription for flower bouquets to be picked up at the farm either weekly or every other week. So what do you need to know about flowers here? I am going to be going over some things that many of you as food growers or perhaps flower growers, you have in your toolbox, but you might not have them in the front of your mind for what's going to be relevant, what you need to know about flower farming. So we're going to start out by going over some of the plant types. Knowing and remembering what kind of plant types there are will help you know about the diversity that you need to have in your gardens if you're going to have a good yield from early spring until late fall. So first off, we have our bulbs, tubers, corms, and rhizome group. We're all in love with our first daffodils and narcissus that come up. They certainly bring a light to our eyes when they show up in the early spring. They're the first things that are in bloom in our gardens too. The daffodils the tulips come next. This is the bed of tulips that we put out last fall, one of the beds of tulips. You can see by the color variation that there are different species that are planted. We have them timed, so they're early, middle, and late season. We have them color coordinated so that we get a large variety for the longest possible time. You may think that once your daffodils, tulips, all the bulbs and rhizomes and corms and things, once you plant them, they're going to be there forever. Not so. Once you combat the deer and the slugs and the squirrels and things like that, you do oftentimes have to replant these, so be prepared for that. Also with tulips, many of the tulip varieties these days that are species or that are specimen tulips are intended to be annuals. So you think that you're buying something that's going to turn into that's going to perennialize, but chances are they're not, unless you're buying a heritage varietal. And then I'd like to encourage you to think outside the box of daffodils and tulips and narcissus and those very familiar friends that we have, and think about ranunculus. They are very easy to grow. You can start them early in a hoop house or a cloche under some cover, or you can sow them directly outside and just get a little later bloom. They have the advantage of regrowing a blossom. It's not like a tulip, one and done. They are much more like say a zinnia that will keep putting out blossoms over a long period of time. They grow in many different colors and many different blossom styles. So they're single petals and ruffled petals, and they're a wonderful addition. Like I say, they're very easy to grow, they're inexpensive, and they're pretty darn hardy. And then how about camas? Camas is a native to our area. It has a beautiful blue foliage or a blossom that goes with, just plays off daffodils beautifully. Wonderful to grow. The rhizomes that it grows from go anywhere from the size of a quarter to pineapple size. We dug a few not knowing what we were digging up and thought, what is this giant thing? And so we put it in a special side of the garden and we just put big bulb on it and then watched to see what happened, and it turned out to be a camas. The alliums are very popular. Many of you know this globe variety. It comes in white, it comes in a darker purple, it comes in a starburst. Once it breaks out of its globe, it turns into a starburst. But there are also many other wonderful varieties, like this pine cone one that you pick when it is in bud stage instead of when it's blossomed out. And the first time I saw it, I was just like, what is that one? And Mediterranean bells are a lovely one, very easy to grow. They come back year after year. Our experience is the deer don't like them, but that doesn't really mean very much. The deer have eclectic tastes. This interior shot of the blossom is, they're just magnificent, and they come on a long stalk, so they umbrella over an assortment. They're a very nice choice. And how about gladiolas? Most of us are familiar with these in Aunt Mabel's garden. They're a very old-fashioned flower. There are all kinds of new varieties that are ruffled and doubles, some dwarf varieties if using a long stalk is an intimidating idea for you, either landscapally or architecturally in a bouquet. Get a dwarf variety. They're easy to grow. Here's what their bulbs look like. You can see by the shoots that this shot was taken when they really needed to get in the ground, but they're pretty forgiving. So I recommend gladiolas. They also make, even if you're not doing a cutting garden, they make a lovely backdrop for things in your gardens. And how about lilies? Lilies have such a wonderful aroma. They're easy to grow. They do grow year after year. They come in a large variety of heights and colors. I would recommend adding some of those if you don't have them. Here's what a lily bulb looks like. And if you look at the base of the bulb, there are little, well, we just call them the babies. I don't know. They're like scales and they pop off very easily. You can plant those in a pot, set them aside someplace where Mother Nature's going to water them. In 2 or 3 years, you'll have clones of your original. Crocosmia. When Crocosmia only came in orange, its reputation kind of went downhill. But now that Lucifer, the red one, is out, it's a magnificent variety. They are very easy to grow. Sometimes it can be a thug, but they're easy to pull out too. And dahlias. Everybody loves dahlias. We leave our dahlias in the ground by and large because we do it on such a scale that digging them and separating them and keeping them in color and having a good storage thing is very problematic for us. So we just leave them in the ground, and really we have very, very little winter dieback or winter loss. Peter leaves them uncut. You know, their stems are hollow and people are worried about water getting down into the stems and rotting the tubers. If you leave them uncut, they become pretty unsightly by January and February, but they do protect those tubers from that rot. Then in the early spring, he takes, the hedge trimmer or his clippers, trims them all back down, and they start anew. They're pretty wonderful. Okay, now I'd like to talk about, we talked about the tubers, corms, rhizomes. Let's talk about biennial plants. Biennials are those that take 2 years to grow. So they start off the first year establishing their roots and some foliage. The second year they bloom, then they're done. They typically bloom in the early spring, and so they fill that nice gap between the bulbs and tubers and your summer annuals. So the campanula have been very successful this year. The colors are just absolutely delightful to work with. Foxglove, you'll see as natives all around logging units and around our countryside. Generally, those come in white and purple, and they are very easy to go out and wildcraft, snip a few off. But they're also beautiful, beautiful varietals that are available now in seed and in plants in nurseries. And they come in a much larger variety of shapes and of heights and color ranges. So I encourage you to think about biennials. And then we have the perennial group. Now the perennials are seeds, of course, that grow year after year after year. So they die back in the winter, most often, not all of them, but they die back in the winter and they'll grow for a number of years. Monardia is one of the ones that does grow back. It's completely invisible during the winter time. And then lavender, of course, doesn't. Lavender is more of a shrub and it's going to stay there, and you're going to know exactly where it is and what kind of room and what kind of soil to do. Some of the things like a verbascum that goes away, you think, oh, I think it's right there. And unless you do some good labeling, you might dig it up or put something over it. Coneflower, generally this group will bloom in the early summer, and some of them will go through the autumn. They'll be coming along through the summer, but the first ones that you'll see will be early summer. So again, after your biennials are done, your perennials will be starting to come along. And hellebores are going to be one of our earliest flowers. As you know, if you grow these, they're a delight with, again, a good color range, generally in the soft pink, lavender, cream range. Some of them are quite tall, some of them are quite short. The blossoms can definitely be cut if you want them to be, or you can just leave them as a joyful thing in your garden. Later on, though, when the bulbs and tubers are blossoming and you need some foliage, oftentimes there's not lovely greenery foliage that comes along that's available and pretty at the time that your daffodils are blooming or your tulips are blooming, and hellebore foliage fills that gap very nicely. Oops, let's see. And then the Rudbeckia will be one of your later perennials. So we're starting to see a few of the blossoms now, but we definitely have some species that are going to be growing. We won't see a blossom until next month, probably. So getting a good variety of these. Oftentimes people think black-eyed Susans are yellows with black centers, but you can see these wonderful autumn colors that they have as well. And who doesn't love a perennial peony? These are so luscious, and our customers particularly love the peonies. I'll be talking about those a little bit more a little later. Typically, your perennials will take a few years to establish. Don't let that stop you. Get them in the ground and let them go. Sea holly is another kind of novelty one. It's very stickery, but it comes, the thistle part of them come from tiny to quite large. They come in yellow and they come in bright blue, almost to purple. So those are quite wonderful. Other perennials in this group that you might like to have in your flower garden are the salvias, the mints, which are so easy to grow. You basically don't have to do anything to mints. They work as the greenery for foliage, penstemons and raspberries. And the raspberries, of course, have the wonderful edible component. The next group are the woodies. And if you want to grow flowers to harvest and cutting, be sure to grow some woodies too. They're most often perennials. You most often have to buy them at a nursery. So there's a monetary investment and there's a time investment to these two, but you won't regret it. If you get a perennial area going that will support your flowers, you'll have material to work with all through the year. Smoke bush is a wonderful one. That deep green or red foliage is just terrific. They have some that have a green center and a red tip. Along the same color line are the 9-barks. The 9-barks come in, I think we have 4 or 5 different varieties. I've got an example here. And not only is the foliage wonderful, but after the flower dies, the seed casing is quite lovely to put in bouquets. And then the viburnums are very versatile, again, for foliage and flowers. So other things that you might want to consider for your garden are spirea, nandina, Pieris japonica, and salal. Salal you might have growing in the forest that, again, you can wildcraft. And again, I'll be talking about those again in a minute too. All right, the next group are the hardy annuals. And hardy annuals are plants that will reseed themselves and withstand a winter and then volunteer the next spring. They are a wonderful low maintenance group, except for pulling them out. They generally take care of themselves, and they have a good variety of sizes, shapes. Again, one of the big things is getting rid of the volunteers. Cerinthe is a very unusual plant. I've got an example of it over here. It has blue-green foliage. It has a droopy blossom. It grows from there. We have a 12-inch variety and we have about a 30-inch variety. And they start early and they're just finishing up now with seeding, but they're a beautiful one. Typically these bloom earlier than our tender annuals, that what we're talking about next. So again, we're filling gaps, we're filling time gaps where you have blossoms and choice in your flower garden. Nigella is Love in the Mist, and you'll see it has a beautiful blossom, but you'll also see that it has a beautiful pod to work with when the blossom is finished. And then Larkspur is just another one that's favorite. We've got one that has, and I think I brought an example of it, that has some like splash color on it this year. These also wildly reseed. You may have to do a little pulling out. But the hardy annuals definitely are a group that you should consider if you have space to let something naturalize. My mom, who had a very manicured garden, this would have made her crazy. So if it's a crazy making group for you, don't do it. But if you like a more, a kind of a regenerative garden, the hardy annuals are a great group to be planting. And the last group are your tender annuals. And these are what most of us think of when we think of summer flowers. They're the things that you get when you go to the grocery store, that you see in all the nurseries. They're bedding plants, basically. So things like snapdragons, tulips, lobelia, which isn't a cut, of course, but when you're seeing that kind of plant, that's the tender annuals. These grow for one season. Typically, they won't reseed. A few do, but typically they don't. So it's get them in early and watch the color go all summer. They typically are blossoming later than the other varieties that or the other groupings that I've just talked about. So getting color early will give way to the mass plantings that you have when you see your tender annuals. Snapdragons are a mainstay in our garden. They do come in a wide variety of blossom shapes other than the traditional snap. We have one growing this year that is a very open flower, and if it wasn't for the foliage and the stalk and the knowing that we planted snapdragons, we wouldn't recognize it as a snapdragon. They now come ruffled and doubled and multicolored, and they're quite majestic. And the asters, once again, tender annuals typically bloom from mid-June until frost. So now let's assume that you've curated your plant selection with your corms and your perennials and your tender annuals, and you've got all of that done. So what else can you do to extend your season? One thing you can do is deadhead your annuals. It's not like deadheading your rhododendron, which is an aesthetic choice for you. Deadheading your flowering plants encourages them to reflower. Flowers are just like folks. What they want to do is reproduce and die. So biologically. So when you leave the seed pods on, you're setting the seeds, they're getting the message that their life is finished. So if you cut those off, they'll think, oop, I've got more work to do, and they'll continue to bloom. Now, especially with the tender annuals, they'll get tired by the end. If they've been blooming as hard as they can for 2 months, of course they're going to get tired. And that's when reseeding, and I'll talk about right now, actually. So things that you can do also to extend the season. If you're seeding, you need to pinch things that will branch. So this is zinnia, it's snapdragon, it's aster, it's dahlia, anything that is going to be putting out side shoots that could potentially flower, you should pinch when they're very little. When you're harvesting, you should cut them in the right place. If you see where my pruners are, you can see a flower start that is coming out right above or right below my pruners. I'm going to cut here. I'm going to take this beautiful red zinnia, and then this shoot is going to develop into another blossom. If I was to cut below that, I would be cutting off the potential for that next blossom. And the plant would have to start regenerating blossoms from much lower down. But I've already got a start there. I don't want to cut it off. So watch where you cut. And then some of the perennials, you can get 2 blossoms a season. Our delphinium is an early perennial. It's absolutely magnificent. This is how it looked about 3 weeks ago. Right now, it's 24 inches tall and dry stalks. Peter took a chainsaw to it and cut them all off. The first time he did it, I was nearly apoplectic, and lo and behold, in August, early September, we had another flush of bloom that was just magnificent. Let's see here. So the next group of hints we're going to do is to recognize the regrowth pattern on the flowers that you grow. And when you know there are 3 types of regrowthing patterns, generally speaking, when you know those and know which kind of plant does which kind of regrowth, you can plan ahead to get the most out of what you've grown. So the first are cut and come again. These are exactly what it says. The more you cut, the more you get. And they put out a tremendous amount of flowers in a season. These are cosmos, marigold, phlox, things like scabiosa, your sweet peas, and zinnias. They won't fail you. Keep them cut and keep them growing. Don't save these blossoms. It's sometimes hard for us to cut what we grow. We're so proud of what we've got out there, and your garden looks so beautiful, and you think, I don't want to shorten the life of these things by bringing them in. If you've got cut and come agains, you really should. You will get more out of them than less. And then we have our medium producers. Oh, I forgot to say with our cut and come agains that if you're doing succession planting and seeding, you want to seed these about a month apart. So you would start them, say, in March or April, and then the following month you would do another seeding. The following month you would do another seeding, so that you have plenty coming along, about a month apart. With your medium producers, these are very much like cut and come again, but they don't bloom as robustly or as long. They need to be reseeded at closer intervals because they're going to finish sooner. So if you're doing succession planting, you would want to plant these every 3 to 4 weeks. And then the last groups are the one and dones. And these are the ones like stock that you plant one plant, you pick one blossom, and you're done. So they seem a little disappointing somehow, except that the flowers that they grow are magnificent. So of course you want to include them. But knowing that you've got a one and done allows you to interplant something else with it. So you put stock in and you interplant with sunflowers. By the time you cut these off, your sunflowers are 12 inches tall, and they're off, and the bed is still in use and productive with more flowers. Also, it's valuable if you know you've got a one and done, because you never want to pinch it. If you pinch it, you'll pinch out your one chance for a blossom. So know what those are. Single stem sunflowers are one of those: stalk, flax, cress, those kinds of things. Okay, so as you may have guessed, succession planning is the name of the game. You plant early, you plant in the middle, you plant late, you just keep planting and planting and planting. If you're not a seeding person, if you don't really have the apparatus, the space, the patience to do seeding, and you're buying your starts, a lot of these things, a lot of these rules or tips go for starts as well. Pinching starts, certainly, if you buy a 4-pack of something early on, separate it out, bump it up to a 4-inch pot, give it a little TLC, and in 2 or 3 weeks, you'll have a plant that you would have played 2 or 3 times as much for. If you keep it small in your 4-inch pot, you can delay the growth of that by a couple of weeks. So just hold it little until making sure it doesn't get root bound, and then bump it up, in 2 or 3 weeks time, and it'll be just a little slower. So you can stagger your blossom times by doing that. So sowing multiple smaller sets of annual seeds a few weeks apart really increases your blossoming window. And then the next thing, this is more for not growing, but a harvesting technique. If you're just hungry for blossoms really early, forcing is a great way to do it. By changing the growing conditions of some plants, you can encourage blossoms to grow. So in the spring, you'll see the wild cherries or blossoming cherries or forsythia in your yard that are beginning to bud out, and you think, oh, I can hardly wait for those to be pretty. Cut a branch or two, take them in the house, smash the stems or clip the stems up vertically up by a couple of inches, put them in warm water and sunlight, and they will blossom in your house beautifully. So even though it's not blooming in your yard, it's blooming in your house, and that will also make you feel like you've got an extended season. Just a second, I think I was going to say something else about that. Oh, just some other things that you can force. Forsythia, cherry branches, pussy willows, red flowering currant is a great one if you've got that in your yard. And your bulbs. We've probably all forced bulbs, paper whites and amaryllis at Christmas time. You can do those with hyacinths. You can do them with tulips, with daffodils. Those things you can also plant carefully, give them the right conditions so that they've had a vernalization project by getting them cold, and bring them into the warmth, and they'll blossom for you. It's a miracle. So harvesting at the right time, when is it that you should be harvesting? A general rule is when a blossom is between 1/3 and halfway open is a good time. If you don't know when to harvest, go by this rule. And before they're heavily pollinated. So some things like sunflowers and delphinium, once they're heavily pollinated, they start to get that message again that it's time to set seed, and they'll disintegrate faster than if they're unpollinated. Sometimes you can't have any idea whether they're pollinated or not, but when you see a lot of bee activity, it's probably time to cut if that's something that you want to harvest. So here are some more flower-specific ideas about when it's a good time to cut. So the tight bud stage, there are some things that want to be in tight bud, and that's the tulips, narcissus and friends, and lilies. You can see in this photograph that there are all kinds of stages that this particular spray has. These very open ones, because we're selling these, our customers need to know what color they are. If you look at the buds, you'll think that maybe that they're pink, when really they're creamy yellow. So I include some open buds or open blossoms on a spray like this to clue in our customer, and also because it's open and I don't want to waste it. But these blossoms will fade relatively quickly. If it's very warm in the house, they might be done in 2 or 3 days. But look at the other stages that we've got up here. This is a partially opened blossom, and it will be finishing, this will maybe last another week. This very tight bud stage will probably last 2 weeks or more, but it's not gorgeous right now. The totally open one is the one that's gorgeous. So if you bring in a spray that has all kinds of blossom stages on it, you'll get the maximum bloom. Another tip is when these fade, just clip them off, get rid of them. Manicuring and grooming your bouquets is really an important thing to be doing to keeping it look fresh. You can extend the life of a bouquet by days and days and days if you just go pick faded flowers off. Take your snips and just get rid of things that aren't looking very pretty. So then there's the marshmallow stage, and this is particularly relevant for peonies. So you'll see these nice, beautiful pink ones. That's what you want to see on your flower, on your table, but they won't last again as long. Depending on how warm it is in your house, they could last from 3 to 7 days, maybe at this stage. Picking in this very tight bud, this is called cracking bud stage, and you can see why. It's got a crack of color in it. If you take it in the house, then it's very, very hard. If you were to give that a little squeeze, it would feel like a ping pong ball. It's very hard. And it won't open properly if you take it in at that stage. If, on the other hand, you look at this little marshmallow over here, when you squeeze that one, it's going to be soft like a marshmallow. It will open more slowly and last longer than this open bud stage. But again, like lilies, it's lovely to bring in some of these first, get rid of them when they're done, and wait for the marshmallow stage to open up. And don't pick up when it's at cracking bud stage. For spike flowers, and these are the partially the 1/3 open group. If you look at this snapdragon stalk, you can see these beautiful yellows are fully opened, and as you go up the spike, they're very closed. When the flowers down below are spent, you're going to pick them off, and they will continue to open as the spike elongates. This rule goes for delphinium, gladiolas, straw flowers. You don't want that center in a straw flower to be wide open. It will be pollinated and it won't dry properly if you're growing straw flowers for drying and winter color. And Godetia is kind of the opposite of the spike flowers. Its flowers are going to be proud and on top and open, and underneath you're going to see masses of buds that are pretty tight, and you're going to think, I don't want to cut off this whole stalk and waste this whole corona of buds, but they will open underneath. So when about 1/3 of the blossoms are open on top, go ahead and cut it, and you will be rewarded with a long bloom. And then there are those that need to be fully open, and just ignore this peony. It just happened to be in this shot with me. These are typically your daisy type flowers and the annuals that we talked about in the tender annual group. So most of the things that you're going to be buying at the nursery as bedding plants. I will be talking about the wiggle test. I'll show you a demonstration of the wiggle test, but basically, some of the daisy flowers, you can't tell by how open the petals are whether it's ready to harvest. The stem needs to be ready, not just the blossom. So I'll just show you in a minute. If you while it's on the stalk, if you take the stalk, grasp the stalk a couple of inches below the head of the blossom and give it a wiggle. And if it does this, it's not ready. You'll cut it off and you'll think, oh, great. And it'll just go bloop in your vase because it's hydrating from its roots. It's not hydrating. It's not self-sufficient in its stem. So when you do it, if it does this, it's totally ready and will rehydrate, particularly important with zinnias. It also is, if you've harvested many zinnias, you know that they kind of break right at their neck. It's very frustrating. You've got a fabulous blossom and it'll just go without any provocation at all. That's a hydration problem. So, well, there's a lot of talk about what it is, but general knowledge is that it's a hydration problem from being cut too early. Okay, and then our last topic is harvesting for vase longevity. Long before you cut, there are some things that you have to do. Well, not long before, the night before. And in this section, because this is just talky stuff, I'm just going to show you some pictures so that you'll have something to look at while I tell you about this section. So the first is hydration. You need to hydrate your plants before you cut them. So if it's been very dry, water first. If you water regularly, they'll probably be all right. But if you're on a deep water cycle where you water once a week and you do a deep watering and then you let it dry out through the week, do a watering of what you're going to cut the night before you cut. You always want to cut in the early morning or in the evening when transpiration is at its lowest. So cut in the cool. Always use clean, sharp clippers like you do for anything that you're doing in the garden. Make sure that they're sterilized and that they're very nice and sharp. You're going to want to take water into the garden with you, and you're going to use buckets that are very clean and fresh water. You want to have your buckets and your water clean enough that you would be very happy to drink out of that bucket. And if you're not, go wash it. You're going to want to strip the foliage in the garden. So foliage is a water hog. And generally when you're making an arrangement, you don't use the greens that have grown on the stem. You're using the blossom and you're adding greens back as a foil for your color. So while you're there, take another bucket, or if you just mulch as you go, you just strip all the foliage from the stem. That will it will preserve the water the cleanliness of the water that you're cutting into. It will send all the water to the blossom instead of the foliage. And it'll save you time when you're making your arrangement because you don't have to clean all those stems. Let's see. Put just a drop of bleach. If you don't have a hydration solution, which most of us don't have around our home gardens, just put a little tiny drop of bleach in your bucket. That will help the bad stuff from growing that might be on the stems or might be on some detritus that gets in the water from what you're picking. You're going to condition the stems in the bucket that you picked in for several hours or perhaps overnight in a cool area. So put them in your garage, put them someplace in the shade if you don't have a covered area, and let them just soak up water. All professional florists do this. This is a bucket pick that we did about this time of year last year. So you can see what things are blooming about now in our garden. You'll see buckets here. Under each one of these collections is a bucket that's full of hydrating water right from the field. And then it finally gets to be time where you get to make up your bouquet. Finally. You're going to mix up a batch of fresh water. You're not going to use your hydrating water. You're going to put some floral food in it. There are many reasons why you should be using floral food and many wives' tales about what else you should use so you don't have to buy flower food. I can't endorse any of those things. Putting Sprite in the water or a penny or a teaspoon of sugar, go buy some flower food. It's inexpensive and it really does its job, and it's worth the investment. It doesn't take very much as you work. So you're either going to build a bouquet in your hand or you're going to build a bouquet in your vase. Your flowers will be fine out of water for a time while you're creating. Because they're well hydrated. They were hydrated in the garden. They've been in hydration solution for several hours, and they can take it to sit on your table while you think, or while you like, oh, I don't have any greens for this, or I need to go snip one more of those. They'll be just fine. Don't worry about it. As you work them into your vase, you're going to want to recut the stems from when they were hydrating. You're going to recut them at a 45-degree angle. This does two things. One, it maximizes the surface area of the stem, so there's more area for them to drink water. And two, when you've got a flat cut, they can bottom out in a vase. They can just sit down there, and so they're not going to be drinking at the rate that they would be drinking if they had an angled stem. And then let's see, then you're going to change the water. If it looks cloudy, it usually will look cloudy in 2 or 3 days. Again, you're going to refresh the floral food, and recut the stems if they look like, you can look at them and see if they're funky. If they're funky, just give them a little snip, only an inch or two. It won't appreciably change the look of your arrangement, but you can just give them a little snip, and then you'll be good. And that's the end of that part of the presentation. I would like to demonstrate just a couple of things, and then we'll have question and answers from the audience and from the Zoom participants. So let me just step over this cord. I brought a few things in so that I could show you what I mean by certain things that I talked about. This is Ultramaria, cut right from the ground and not stripped. I'm going to strip them just like that into a bucket, and then I'm going to just remove these as well. So this is now ready to use. If I do that right in the garden, it takes basically no time at all, and I don't have to do it later. Got that ready. Okay, let's see. I wanted to show you the wiggle test. Here we go. I cut these last night, so they might not be as wiggly as I want them to be. So this one, you would think from that blossom that it would be ready to cut. You'd think from this blossom, maybe it wouldn't be ready to cut.
Wow.
Yeah, it's significant. The first time I ever harvested salal, I was wildcrafting, and I had old growth, leathery, bug-eaten, ugly, this delicious new growth coming out. I was so excited. I cut a big bucket of it. I was so excited, brought it into Peter and said, look what we've got to work with. And it all just went wonk. I didn't know that the wiggle test worked for woodies too. So if you're out wildcrafting, beware. I wanted to show you, this is a 9-bark, and I wanted to show you this beautiful pod. And along that line, I want to encourage you to include things that are not only blossoms. Pods, grasses, we grow a lot of grasses. They just add a kick to a bouquet. This is explosion grass. You can, it needs something to see it under. See it behind. The little tips on this, when it's bright, are golden, and so it looks like a firework. And you stick this up above your floral thing, and it just looks like a celebration. It's so beautiful. Poppy pods, if you've got opium poppies in your yard, they can be pretty thuggish, but these pods are beautiful additions. You really don't have to do anything to get them, except harvest them. Wheat, I find a little more challenging to use, just because it always just looks like wheat, and why is it in my bouquet? But I'm getting more used to it. The pattern of the kernels is stunning. So if you tuck it down a little bit, it's just, again, kind of a little surprise in a bouquet. And then this is millet. Again, it's a little hard to work with. I would strip this foliage off, but sometimes I'd strip it all the way down. Sometimes I really like the using this kind of greenery, but just another idea. Here is that larkspur that I was talking about. Afterwards, if you come up, you can see some of the dash of color on here. I don't know if you can get close enough to see it, but it is quite spectacular. The larkspur is great. Larkspur is one of those that needs to be stripped, that needs to be picked when it still has blossoms that have not opened on the top. I noticed when I just did this that there was a petal that fell off, and that's because I waited a little long to pick some of those, but I would still use these for sure. On that line, here are some snappies. These are examples of being phototropic. So they want to go towards the sun, or maybe snapdragons are geotropic. One grows towards the sun, one grows towards the earth. If you have spiked flowers and you use nova netting or stake them, they will be very much encouraged to be nice and straight. These actually were straight when I picked them last night, but over the course of the evening, they've done that. That doesn't mean they're not usable. They're just wonderful. So these blossoms are going to be fading faster, and these are going to be opening up as they mature in your vase. This is a novelty. It's called the Bells of Ireland. Very easy to grow. It's a hardy annual. It does reseed. Some people think it's hard to seed. We haven't had any problem with it. Look at the size of the stalk on that. I don't usually do bouquets that are massive enough to need something that's this tall. So I would just strip these, maybe even down to here, and then tuck it in amongst things, and it just goes quite wonderfully. Here is the Crocosmia lucifer that we talked about, and for those of you in the audience, if you'd like to come up afterwards, and just take a check at the coloration that goes along the stem. It's also very nice to have an intentional flower that's angular and not straight up. These add not only richness from color, but just from their shape. Another thing to do, we talked about growing greens. This is Hypericum. And there are several different varieties we have here. We have ones that have very dark berries. We have ones that are going to turn into yellow berries, and then a lighter red. The dark foliage goes with so many, well, of course I don't have anything here that it's going to enhance, but trust me, it works into a lot of bouquets. Lilies, I wanted to show you just an example of the stage that will give you maximum life, and then here's an open one. So don't be afraid to cut those. You're not going to waste either one of them. Daisy-like flowers, when to pick. If you pick a daisy-like flower in either of these two stages, chances are they will never open. You'll hope that they'll open, but they'll really stay like this. Now, there is something to be said for adding that to a bouquet, just as a little accent, but don't expect that it's going to turn into something more than what it is right now. This is the perfect stage to do it. It's fully open. You can see the entire center. All the leaves are fully developed. But if you wait too long, we're going to get petal inversion. So if you look, well, you don't even need to look at the back of the petal. You can look at it and see that the leaves are turning downwards. This is a good indication in dahlias, in zinnias, that you're past your prime. So if you see this happening, cut that baby quick and get it out of the garden. And then just enjoy it for what it can give you. It won't give you a terribly long life, but you'll also do yourself, you're going to have to deadhead it in a week. So why not take it inside, enjoy it in just a little nosegay, and then let it go. I have here some of the Nigella in both blue, white, and you can see the pods in person. Oh, here's the Corinth that we were talking about. So this is the shrimp flower. It's quite a wonderful novelty, and it's very, very easy to grow. And then I've got some sweet peas, some monarda. These are just because they're pretty, so why not? Oh, peonies. Here they are. Well, these have opened because they were in warmth. These have been in our cooler for about a month. And we cut them at the marshmallow stage, wrap them tightly in newspaper and a garbage bag or saran wrap, and we strip all the foliage off, and they sit and they just go into stasis. And so we now have peonies when really no other flower growers around. You can't get local ones anyway. I'm sure you can get them from Ecuador or Colombia, but so I'm sorry this has opened up. It was like this when I took it out, and if you were to squeeze it, you would feel the marshmallowy. And then here is this will open. I should have done an experiment by cutting this stem and putting it in some warm water at the start of the talk, and you would see the difference of how quickly they really open. So that's it for me. I'm ready for some questions. Yeah.
Is there any truth to the fact with lilies, when they start to open, you can make them last longer by plucking off those pollen pods?
Pollen?
Yeah.
I don't know that to be scientifically true, and
Okay.
I don't, the reason that I know to pluck those off is so that they don't stain everything
Right,
in the
right.
world. But I don't know about the longevity. I have to look that up, sorry. Yes?
Do you have a suggestion on a plant to plant on top of your daffodils after the daffodils are done, or what do you do with that?
That bed.
Can you repeat, make sure to repeat questions?
For the Zoom audience, the question was, what can you do to a daffodil bed once they're done? It's easy to do an interplanting on daffodils because that foliage is going to be dying back completely. So really any of your plants that are going to be going in as small plants, not large bedding plants, can be dug there because you don't want to disturb the daffodil bulbs while the foliage is still green. So you can obviously see where they are. You just interplant any of your hardy annuals, your tender annuals. Hardy annuals sometimes are really good to plant over it because they'll take care of that problem for you. You also, depending on how often your daffodils, how long your daffodils have been there, if they're continuing to be hardy and robust, you should just leave them in there. If they're not, maybe you should dig that bed up, give that soil a rest, and then plant something else there and move them. But really, your tender annuals and your hardy annuals would go in there. I wouldn't put any perennials or biennials in that bed.
I have a couple questions.
Sure.
One is, do you have issues with voles, is that?
Oh, we have terrible vole
And
problems.
so what do you do about it? Because I'm experiencing it for the first time this year.
Traps, we use traps and caught a lot of mice, not any voles. But I think mice were also a problem. We had, early in the spring, we had husbanded a very large bed of Sweet William over the winter, and we were so excited because things were starting to bloom. And one day Peter, bud up, they weren't, it was pretty early on. Peter and I were weeding down there, and he said, "Boy, these are brittle." And I went and picked a whole plant up and said, "They're not brittle, they're eaten off." And we lost like 10 feet of Sweet William that we waited for 2 years for, and that was voles. We've never had that kind of problem before. Peter is using some castor oil product that's available in the nurseries.
So
Just
like
some-
it's originally made for mole issues?
It's made for vole issues,
Okay.
yes. Kind of common wisdom is that you can't eradicate voles, you can move them to your neighbors. Pretty terrible, Master Gardeners. So I'm sorry that I don't have anything better. I wish I did, and we'd certainly be using it.
So my other question was, I was curious when you brought up your tulip situation, because I have a cut flower garden that I sell from, and I just plant tons of tulips, but I pull my tulip bulbs out. I don't try to save them
Right.
because the return value for the real estate doesn't seem, and I'm just curious. It
We do
looked
the
like you're
same.
trying, oh, okay.
No, we do the same. And it kills me. We have trays and trays and trays of tulip bulbs that look like they're real tulip bulbs and they're not gonna do very much. So yes, we did plant our tulips this year so that to harvest, you just pull the entire thing and cut it off. And we do the same thing.
So then, oh, I'm sorry, was there another question?
There is one
Yes,
more.
go
Yep.
ahead. Go ahead, I'll remember.
Yes.
Ice water, is that helpful to, help with the cuttings? Ice in the water, in the bucket or in the?
Ice in the water. The question is ice in the water helpful with cutting? I don't think you need to go that far. Cool water out of your tap is just fine. Yeah, I wouldn't cut into warm water because things will start going, but cool water, just right out of the tap or the hose is fine.
So, we have one in the chat, it says, since you don't dig up your dahlias in the fall, how often do you dig and divide the tubers? The dahlia tubers?
We dig and divide when the blossom count starts going down or the quality of the blossom goes down. And it's usually about every 3 years. Or if we really love one and we want more of it, we'll dig it up and steal a few. And
Candice, what's your all-time favorites? Maybe your top 2 or 3 favorites?
oh, I get asked that often and it just depends on what the season is. I mean,
Okay.
when those peonies come out,
Yeah.
I'm in love, and when the delphinium are blooming, ranunculus early in the summer, ooh, man. So I don't really have one. The picture of the hydration picture of buckets of flowers, when we pick, we take all those buckets down into the garden, and then we have a cement floored work area that's very shady, it's very cool, and they sit there, and when I see those buckets of color, we've got probably maybe not a full 20 feet full of color, and it just makes your heart sing to see those colors, so I like them all.
How do you, so with tulips, I'm curious now, so you pull them out and you snip off the bulb.
Mhm.
So how do you propagate them? Where do your tulips come from?
We buy them new.
Wow,
Yeah.
wow.
And it's not necessarily a profitable venture to do
Yeah,
that. But we love our tulips and our customers love our tulips. And so it's kind of a little bit of a loss leader for us or a break even.
Uh-huh.
But it gives us such pleasure to get going.
Yeah,
that,
sure.
That
So
we do
then,
it.
is it true that do all the tulips in the world come from Holland or something like that, or?
Well, ours do, but a lot of them come from Skagit Valley too.
Oh, okay,
So-
oh, sure, right, so they have the secrets on how to.
They have the secrets, yeah. Unfortunately, I don't have the secrets, yeah.
Speaking of that, how do you get new, different seeds or bulbs, or do you have a favorite place to get things?
We buy from all the seed companies. So we start seeding, sometimes we start seeding in January, but February it really starts. And we seed trays and trays and trays and trays every week. We have a germination chamber that speeds up the germination. So once those seeds have set up the tiniest little hair, they come out of the germination chamber, they go under grow lights. Once they get out of there, they go into the greenhouse, they sit on heat mats and under lights, and then they go off of those, so we do it, like that. And it goes basically from February through, we're still doing it now. We're doing succession seeding, particularly with sunflowers right now. We order a lot from Johnny's, we order a lot from Ball Seed, Fedco we offer from, and then we do some smaller seed growers, Redemption, Floret, just kind of what we look for varieties and colors that we want. And whoever will give us those, that's who we buy from. Okay, yeah,
I'm just a home gardener who's learning how to do all this.
Yeah.
I'm sitting on, my house and my yard are 2 inches of dirt on top of rock that a glacier sat on for 1,000 years. And so I have that much dirt. And so everybody I've talked to says, welcome to pots. Which is great, except does all of this stuff still stand for how you grow something in a pot instead of in the dirt?
Basically it does, yeah, yeah, basically it does. Flowers are wonderful to grow in containers, absolutely wonderful.
Okay.
What you might sacrifice or what you might need to work with is staking some things, because they don't have the opportunity to rely on one another to hold them up straight.
My sunflowers are taped to my fence.
Yeah, yeah.
Thank you.
I noticed you didn't mention irises. Are those just not, we don't include them? Or-
We have both bearded irises and Japanese iris. The Japanese iris lasts longer. The bearded irises just really don't work very well for a cut. They're lovely for landscapes work, but they just don't cut well. They just don't last long enough. All right.
The Zoom chat is full of your praises, Candice. and
Oh,
it's like, thank you.
Thank you, everyone. Oh, Muriel has one
One
thing.
last thing,
Yeah.
no, it's not a question, I just wanted to say, anyone who would like to join me and Candice for lunch is welcome to do that. After
lovely.
we're done here.
Woohoo!
Thank you.
Well, thanks for filling out the surveys. It'll pop up for folks online, and we've also got paper surveys in-house. That's the other
Okay,
piece.
and everybody could hear you say that?
I hope so.
Okay, good, all right. All right, to you. Thank you, Zoom people.
Thank you.
Thank you. Come up and look at the flowers if you're interested in seeing any of these things.